a very important part of the professional wrestling experience. Before the internet, before television, sound was one of the most fundamental elements that made wrestling good or bad. But sound is pretty hard to focus on when you're staring at people beating the tar out of each other. So I think it's time that we give a little bit more attention to the sounds that we all take for granted. Because today, Dave knows 7 reasons why sound is so important in wrestling. Ooh, that sounds like it hurts. When dealing with fictional combat, the best way to make things seem more painful and more legitimate is through sound. When professional wrestlers choreograph their moves, we want to believe it, and hearing loud, hard noises really helps to sell the impact. Just look at comic books, a purely visual medium that uses visual sound effects like BAMs and POWs as simple visual representations of noise because of how well sound works to inform the audience. It's why wrestlers sometimes stop as they punch, or slap their thighs when they kick, or beat their chest when they throw a haymaker. Now sure, there are some who don't care for these methods, so instead, some wrestlers will clap a boot when they're getting kicked, or take hits and bumps on flat parts of their body that will still hurt, but can better absorb a hit and also produce a really great sound when doing so. This is why the back bump is so popular, as well as taking forearm strikes to the cheek and of course, chest chops. The secret to those is that some wrestlers will actually cup their hands, creating a small pocket of air that pops when it makes contact. And furthermore, when it comes to chest chops in wrestling, some wrestlers will even quiet down the crowd just so everybody can hear the noise when they make it. As you can figure, the key to all this is raising the volume of the sound without raising the amount of pain that goes along with it, as we often associate louder noises with harder hits. And so, by hacking this mental correlation, wrestling fans get to better believe what they see, even though it may not be as bad as it sounds. And while we do live in a world where many of us do most of our wrestling watching on screens, and therefore sound effects could be added in post-production, these live in-person sound effects are done for the live crowd, which is still very important, and in fact, that leads me to listen to that audience. The live crowd does so much for a wrestling event. When they cheer, when they boo, when they jump up out of their seat and cringe from a rough hit, their reactions connect to the audience at home and also helps to sell the match. And something that tends to throw off American fans from Japanese-style pro wrestling is that their crowds tend not to get too rambunctious. On the other hand, something that many Americans just love about crowds from the UK is just how rowdy and vocal they get during shows, which can also be said about New Yorkers and Philadelphians as well. But not only does this provide adequate influence to fans who aren't able to be there live and in person, but the things that fans shout during shows can also provide feedback to booking, or at least it should. Too bad it doesn't really seem like they listen. Anyway, and more importantly, live crowd reactions provide valuable feedback to the wrestlers themselves. When they hear something that is pleasing their audience, they know to keep it up. But if they're doing something that's falling flat on the other hand, well, they might think it's time to change things up. It's all dependent upon what they hear from the crowd. Ground sound. Going back to the sounds of the match, one of the most significant noise sources there is the mat itself. Because the squared circle in wrestling is not just a mere boxing ring, at least it's not supposed to be, and yeah, sometimes it is, and I feel bad for those wrestlers. Anyhow, the reason why you want a different ring is because not only does a wrestling ring need to have more give in order to cushion the blow for wrestlers, but a good wrestling ring will also make great wrestling sounds when wrestlers get slammed on it. This sound is so valuable that sometimes promoters will put a microphone underneath the ring. That way they can play the sound all over the speakers in order to better give the entire stadium that earth-shattering sound. However, while we're on the subject of microphones, canned heat. Speaking of speakers, there are other ways that surround sound can be used to affect a crowd, as the canned term heat refers to playing pre-recorded crowd reactions over the speakers during a show. For instance, let's say you have a wrestler that you want to get over. A cheap and easy way to get the crowd to cheer him is to artificially play crowd cheers throughout the stadium. And sadly, that might even manipulate some fans into going along with the program. Now allegedly, this trick was used to get Goldberg chants brewing in the beginning of his career before he really caught on with fans. And also, going back in terms of post-production, canned heat can also be used to artificially add different crowd reactions to a video after it's been added to something like, I don't know, the WWE Network, making it very different on replay than it was during the live show. Hey, it may be a dirty trick, but it's definitely one that's been used for quite some time. Listen to the music. A wrestler's entrance music can be glorious, and it can also make all the difference in the world. When done right, it instantly hooks the crowd to the song using the lore of music, which can also hook fans to a wrestler. But how does this magic work? A very often used strategy by WWE, which I think historically has produced some of the very best entrance songs in all of wrestling, is a simple one. The first trick is that the song is easily identifiable by the first two notes alone. Or even if it's not music and it's just a wrestler saying a phrase like, "If you smell what the Rock is cooking," or the sound of glass breaking, or even the noise of a countdown clock ticking down, these opening sounds are immediately recognizable to fans. The moment you hear them, you know exactly who's coming out. But then, the next piece of musical genius comes from several seconds later, as the song begins to swell up with another pop right after the intro. Just think about it. Some of the very best wrestling songs ever often start with a quick, easy to recognize intro that's usually followed up within the next 10 seconds by another musical burst. And that's the exact moment when the wrestler actually makes his entrance to the crowd. The intro gets us ready to know who's about to come out, and then we get a big musical cue to pop for when the wrestler actually does. It's a simple yet effective formula, but it's one that really works for all the right reasons. Ding, ding. Alright, as a timekeeper myself, perhaps I am a little bit biased to the sound, but it really is an important noise that often gets forgotten about. First, let me just say that in many venues, even large ones, the sound is coming from the bell itself and nothing more, echoing throughout the entire arena without any assistance. And that classic bell sound is one of the most synonymous noises in all of wrestling. Don't think so? Well, just try imagining a wrestling match without it. The bell signifies when a match starts and when it ends. Without a ringing bell, everything else just kind of rings hollow. The sound of silence. And finally, sometimes the most impressive noise is none whatsoever. For example, let's look at The Undertaker's match at WrestleMania 30. As much as I hated the outcome, I will say the aftermath was executed perfectly. As you might remember, a stunned silence fell over the crowd, which gave everyone watching that empty feeling that wrestling would never be able to make you happy ever again. And, well, kind of think that feeling might be right. But anyway, sometimes it doesn't have to be as extreme as all that, because one of the most overlooked parts of wrestling commentary is actually knowing when not to talk, allowing the move to speak for itself, because sometimes something is just so devastating that it requires no other comment, and anything that you can say will just work to spoil the mood. Or how about when a wrestler takes a brutal beatdown and is left laying in the ring as a broken mess? To get that beating over in the best possible way, sometimes commentators will just stay awkwardly quiet, knowing that just saying synonyms for getting beat up over and over again won't do nearly as much as not talking at all. Because when done right, sometimes silence can be pretty deafening. Well, there you have it, 7 ways that sound impacts wrestling. But what are some of your favorite noises in wrestling? Let me know down in the comments. And don't forget to support me on Patreon and help to keep this channel going, just like Richard Lee, The Woos, and Jesus Pharaoh. Guys, thank you so much for all your generosity, and thank you for supporting this channel. Thanks again for watching, and as always, Dave knows.